In Christian theology, the original sin declares that all humans are born in sin and commanded to be redeemed by God through Jesus Christ. In many ways, the same is true of Inverness Caledonian Thistle. The original sin, in Cali Thistle's case, was the divisive and controversial merging of two local clubs 30 years ago, whose supporters were commanded to get along. Those two clubs were Caledonian, the most successful team in Inverness at the time, and Inverness Thistle, thus creating the unusual name Caledonian Thistle FC, later extended to Inverness Caledonian Thistle FC, and sometimes shortened to ICT for the benefit of the feckless and bone idle. The odds were always stacked against Inverness Caledonian Thistle. Despite being based in one of only 8 cities in Scotland, and one of the fastest growing cities in Western Europe, the club's controversial founding alienated vast numbers of former Caledonian and Inverness Thistle supporters. Meanwhile, their choice of site for a new stadium made it difficult to entice new fans of the club. Nonetheless, Inverness, though born in sin and the child of a loveless marriage, somehow stumbled their way to not just the Scottish Premiership, the top flight of Scottish football, but to iconic status. During the early 2000s, Cali Thistle developed a reputation as an outstanding cup team and notorious giant killers, beating Celtic 3-1 in 2000, spawning one of the most famous football headlines of all time, Super Cali go ballistic, Celtic are atrocious, and repeating the feat in 2003. The early to mid-2010s heralded a golden age for Inverness, as they finished 4th, 5th and 3rd in the Scottish Premiership, only trailing Celtic and Aberdeen in the 2014-15 season, lifting a first ever Scottish Cup in the same season, the Premier Cup competition in Scottish football, and the second oldest in the world, and qualifying for the Europa League as a result. These were heady days for Cali Thistle. In November 2014, the Press and Journal, which is the biggest newspaper serving the Scottish Highlands, even dared to ask the question of whether Inverness could challenge Celtic for the Scottish Premiership title. To continue the biblical analogies, that was the pride before destruction and the haughty spirit before a fall, as was foretold in Proverbs 16:18. And Cali Thistle's fall would be a sudden and catastrophic one, and their destruction could still prove to be absolute. Despite reaching a second Scottish Cup final in 2023, where they lost 3-1 against Ange Postecoglou's Celtic, Inverness only finished 6th in the Scottish Championship, and last season, they were relegated. In their first season in Scotland's third tier for a quarter of a century, Cali Thistle are currently bottom of the league on -3 points after 11 games, after the club entered administration and was automatically docked 15 points earlier this week as a result. Administration was a last resort, designed to buy the club some time to source investment, restructure, and stay afloat. But there are no guarantees, and if they can't do that, Inverness Caledonian Thistle, the pride of the Highlands, Scotland's third best football club only 10 years ago, and Scottish Cup finalists less than 18 months ago, could well cease to exist. But how did such a biblical collapse come about? Well, that's what today's video is all about. So sit back, relax, and join me on the long journey up to the Scottish Highlands, maybe the most beautiful, but also among the most remote parts of the United Kingdom, to the coast of Moray Firth, an inlet of the North Sea, as we take a closer look at the extraordinary demise of a football club that is in very real danger of sinking this season. And buckle up, because this one is absolutely mental. Inverness Caledonian Thistle are a football club defined by geography. The most northern city in the United Kingdom, Inverness is the cultural, social and economic hub of the Scottish Highlands, which comes with its challenges and its benefits. In 1973, Highland League champions Inverness Thistle were nearly elected to the Scottish League. It was reported at the time that one of the reasons why Thistle narrowly missed out was because of how isolated Inverness is, and particularly how isolated it was back then in a league system that had never included a team further north than Aberdeen. 20 years later, however, following improved transport links to the Highlands, the Scottish League agreed to expand by welcoming 2 new teams from the Highlands. Ross County, who had won the 1991 and 1992 Highland League championships, as well as impressing in the early rounds of the Scottish Cup, were allocated one of the 2 vacancies, but things were a bit more complicated when it came to Inverness. Inverness is by far the largest population centre in the Highlands. It became a city in 2000, so naturally, it made sense for one of the two vacancies to go to a club from Inverness. The problem was that Inverness had three clubs competing in the Highland League: Clacknacuddon, Caledonian, and Inverness Thistle. Caledonian were the most successful in terms of league titles and had won the most recent Highland League title in 1988. Inverness Thistle had won just the previous Highland League title in 1987, as well as claiming arguably the biggest Scottish Cup scalp, a 3-0 win against Kilmarnock, and Clacknacuddon had dominated the early years of the Highland League in the late 1800s and early 1900s, as well as having the highest record attendance. In other words, all three were significant clubs with their own proud histories and successes. The Scottish League, nonetheless, proposed that Caledonian, Inverness Thistle, and Clacknacuddon merge to form one big club representing Inverness, thus ending any dispute about which Inverness club should claim the vacant Scottish League spot, while also, in their eyes, giving them the best chance of competing within the Scottish League. All three clubs, it is worth noting, were founded in 1885. They were deeply rooted in their local communities, had existing rivalries dating back over a century, and modest but very passionate fan bases. To say that the merger was controversial, therefore, would be putting it mildly. Clacknacuddon ultimately rejected the proposals to merge, maintaining their Highland League status as an independent club, one which they still hold. They won their 18th Highland League title in 2004, going level with Caledonian in the all-time title rankings, and still play at Grant Street Park, which has been their home since 1886. At separate meetings, Inverness Thistle voted 33-12 in favour of the move, meanwhile Cali's vote was so tight, 55-50 in favour of merging, that just 3 people determined the entire future course of football in Inverness and in the Scottish Highlands. The fact that over a quarter, at least, of Inverness Thistle fans didn't approve of the move, many of them feeling as though they were being subsumed by Caledonian, moving from their home at Kingsmills Park to Cali's Telford Street Park, where the urinals were reportedly painted their black and red colours, and basically half of Cali fans disapproved of it, believing that they could support a Scottish League club on their own and didn't need to merge with anyone else to make the step up, resulted in a lot of enduring bitterness. Many former Caledonian and Inverness Thistle supporters didn't make the transition to support the new club, turning their attention to other teams, rugby or some other sport entirely, with a lot of older Inverness residents refusing to U-turn on that position. A lot of younger football fans likewise, without established Caledonian Thistle supporters in their lives, to direct them towards their local club, ended up supporting Aberdeen, Celtic or, most notably in Inverness, Rangers instead. I am talking about this as though it were a phenomenon in the 1990s to give some background on Inverness Caledonian Thistle, but all of it is equally relevant now when discussing Cali Thistle's rise, fall, or threatened extinction. As you will soon find out, this isn't the only time in which geography has played a key role in the history of football in Inverness. The Scottish League's new Highland clubs both made decent starts to life in the 3rd Division, as Ross County finished 3rd, just outside of the automatic promotion places, and Caledonian Thistle, for all of their troubles and stay-away supporters, finished 6th. The following year, Caledonian Thistle leapfrogged local rivals Ross County, who finished 4th, up into 3rd place. Over the summer break, Cali Thistle moved from Caledonian's old stadium, Telford Street Park, to Caledonian Stadium, then known as Caledonian Park. The stadium move to a brand new purpose-built stadium for the new club had been part of the terms set out for Cali Thistle's admission to the Scottish League. Over the same summer, 1996, the club was also renamed Inverness Caledonian Thistle FC, giving them the longest name in the Scottish League. Some people said that the name was too long, but the club said no, Thistle do nicely. I can only apologise. In their first season in a new stadium and with a new name, Cali Thistle won the 3rd Division title, and with it, promotion to the 2nd Division, becoming the first Highland club to reach that level, as Ross County missed out on promotion on goal difference, and in only their 2nd season in the 2nd Division, Inverness won promotion yet again, finishing as 2nd Division runners-up and booking their place in the 1st Division. Caley Thistle's impressive start to life in the Scottish League could be viewed as a vindication of the merger project and stadium move, and in the 2000s, things went from strength to strength. 2 Scottish Cup victories against Celtic in 3 seasons, within a decade of Inverness stepping up from the Highland League and going full-time, was a genuinely remarkable achievement. The Super Caley Go Ballistic Celtic Are Atrocious headline brought Caley Thistle international attention, but in some ways, it was a victory over a full-strength Celtic team in 2007 when the two teams met as equals in the Scottish Premier League in front of a crowd of more than 7,000 in Inverness, which provided the greatest evidence of their progress. After Inverness was granted city status in 2000, Caley Thistle held a referendum on whether to change the club's name yet again, this time to Inverness City. The suggestion was resoundingly defeated. A new club, called Inverness City, was founded in 2006, joining the North Caledonian Football League, but they folded in 2019 due to difficulties finding a stadium. In the 2003-04 season, Caley Thistle secured promotion to the Scottish Premier League, a landmark achievement for a Highland club, by winning the First Division title. Unfortunately, the SPL had a 10,000 minimum capacity stadium requirement, forcing Inverness to either play their home games over 100 miles and 2.5 hours away at Aberdeen's Pittodrie Stadium, or turn down promotion to the SPL. The club accepted the temporary move to Pittodrie. Unfortunately, midway through that season, the SPL lowered their stadium capacity requirement to 6,000. Inverness carried out emergency renovations and expansion works, which took just 47 working days, allowing Scottish Premier League football to be played in the Highlands for the first time. Following relegation in 2009, Inverness returned as champions at the first attempt, ushering in a golden age on the banks of the Moray Firth. Under former England captain Terry Butcher and ex-Celtic defender John Hughes, Caley Thistle finished 4th, 5th and 3rd in successive seasons in Scotland's top flight, reaching the Scottish League Cup final for the first time in 2014, where they only lost on penalties against Aberdeen, but returning to Glasgow in 2015, where they beat Falkirk 2-1, despite being down to 10 men, courtesy of an 86th-minute winner, in front of almost 40,000 at Hampden Park in the even more prestigious Scottish Cup final. This was a remarkable period in the history of Inverness Caledonian Thistle, and they made their short-lived European debut the following year. But whilst those who oversaw it deserve immense credit, there are legitimate questions to be asked of the club's management even this early on. Despite bringing in record revenue as a result of their success, all of that income, and then some, was reinvested in recruitment, wages, and their coaching staff. Whilst the biggest clubs can afford to spend everything that they bring in and run modest deficits, for challenger clubs, which Caley Thistle undoubtedly were, punching well above their weight, such rare success provides unique opportunities to make hay while the sun shines, so to speak. Inverness invested practically nothing throughout this period in the long-term future of the club, though. The Caledonian Stadium, itself problematic for a number of reasons that we will come on to, has been basically untouched since its emergency expansion carried out in record time back in 2004. Meanwhile, even when they were finishing in the top 5 in the Scottish Premiership and reaching Scottish Cup and League Cup finals, Caley Thistle still had the training facilities of a Scottish Division 1 club, the league that they are now back in. Inverness had the opportunity to invest in the future, turning Caley Thistle into a real community club and the pride of the Highlands, as they began to nickname themselves at this time, by putting in place the building blocks that would secure the club's future for generations to come. Of course, that would have meant sacrificing a little bit of investment in the playing or coaching staff, and with it, likely their ability to maintain their position at the top end of the division. But the reality is, that was always going to be near enough impossible to maintain, as it proved, even with reckless overspending. Caley Thistle's fortunes began to turn immediately after their 2015 Scottish Cup success. Top scorer Adam Rooney's departure to Birmingham City in 2011 had been a painful one, as Inverness failed to tie him down on a new contract and their star man departed on a free. The pain of that was subdued somewhat by the arrival of Billy Mackay, also on a free, from Northampton Town in the same summer. Mackay went on to score 62 goals in 141 games in the Highlands, inspiring Inverness to their highest ever league finishes and first major cup success, but in January 2015, Mackay joined Wigan Athletic. It was a disastrous move for Mackay personally, who only ever played 11 games and failed to score a single goal for Wigan, but it was an even worse one for Inverness. The £150,000 fee was better than nothing, but in the nearly 10 years since then, Caley Thistle still haven't replaced his goals. In fact, the most goals that anyone has scored for Inverness in a single season since Billy Mackay joined Wigan is, it's Billy Mackay, who returned in 2021 with 13 league goals. For 5 straight seasons, Inverness didn't have a single player who hit double figures. In the 2016-17 season, Caley Thistle were relegated, but rather than learning from their errors and adopting a more sustainable approach, the club doubled down that promotion back into the Premiership was the only way to put them back on a solid financial footing. They came close in the 2018-19 season, reaching the Premiership playoffs, where they were hammered by Dundee United in the semi-finals. Over the summer, as Inverness celebrated the 25th anniversary of their controversial founding, the club appointed the man who would become their most controversial chief executive. Scott Gardiner is an experienced operator in football. A Rangers fan, which he makes no secret about, Gardiner previously worked for the Glasgow Giants, as well as holding the top jobs at Hearts and Dundee. There are conflicting reports about Gardiner's work at all of his previous clubs, but he was in charge at Dundee when they appointed John Bomber Brown, who relegated the club, and at Hearts. His time at the club is probably best or worst remembered by most Scottish football fans, for when Hearts forgot to order new seats, a mistake often attributed to Gardiner, when renovating the main stand at Tynecastle, delaying their return and forcing them to pay a reported £150,000 to rent Murrayfield for a month. Gardiner left Hearts shortly after that incident. His time at Inverness has been no less controversial. Scrap that. It has been far more controversial. The opening line of Inverness's club statement announcing Gardiner's appointment read, "Inverness Caledonian Thistle is delighted to announce the appointment of a prominent figure in Scottish football administration as its new chief executive officer." End quote. 5 years on, it would be fair to say that Gardiner has become an even more prominent figure in Scottish football administration, with an extra emphasis on the word administration. Throughout Gardiner's time at the helm, Caley Thistle's management appeared to take their eye off the ball when it came to matters of football, with far more focus on alternative revenue streams. In the interest of fairness, because I am nothing if not scrupulously fair, you could argue that this preceded Gardiner's arrival at the Caledonian Stadium. The oft-forgotten and short-lived chief executive who preceded him, Yvonne Crook, seemed to be a move in that general direction. Crook appeared to have perfectly benign intentions, but she didn't seem to know anything about football, which, is a bit of a drawback as the CEO of a football club. I don't say that because she is a woman and I am some sort of misogynistic bigot. As you all well know, I am one of the most woke football channels on YouTube. Not my words, ladies and gentlemen, the words of @KaitoSchmidtOfficial. And in fairness, all it takes to qualify as one of the wokest football channels on YouTube is believing that sexual assault is bad. It's a low bar, but I'll take the kudos nonetheless. No, I say that because Yvonne Crook had no experience working in football before. Yeah. She owns View Marketing, a marketing agency focused on tourism and leisure in Inverness, and she is a director of Good Highland Food, a company that provides catering services in Inverness and in the Highlands. Pretty much all of Crook's experience is in events, marketing and tourism, so not totally alien industries to football, but all the same, not football. Gardiner was experienced in football, even if that experience may have included getting relegated and forgetting to order any seats for a stadium renovation, but at Caley Thistle, the football appeared to take a backseat to a whole series of other business ideas. Where to begin? Well, there was the obsession with a potential free port coming to Inverness, a government-approved special economic zone with dubious benefits to the local community. Freeports typically provide relief on tax, duties and tariffs, which supporters claim can increase growth in economic activity, while critics describe them as mini tax havens which encourage money laundering and don't actually increase economic activity, they just shift it from one place to another, while actually reducing the social good of that economic activity. The Inverness and Cromarty Firth Green Freeport, likewise, has divided opinion among locals. But in June 2024, it was announced that the land around the Caledonian Stadium wouldn't be included within the zone, making its impact upon Cally Thistle somewhere between minimal and non-existent. Then there was the attempt to relaunch the Inverness Cally Thistle Concert Company. The Caledonian Stadium hosted 3 major concerts in the 2000s, Elton John in 2007, Rod Stewart in 2010, and Rod again in 2016. Rod, seemingly, just can't get enough of Inverness. Gardiner saw concerts as a ticket to greater revenue, striking deals to bring Tom Jones and Westlife to Inverness. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic saw those concerts cancelled, and the stadium briefly used as a drive-in cinema instead, but in 2021, the idea was relaunched. The Caledonian Stadium hosted Andrea Bocelli and Duran Duran on consecutive nights in July 2022, but the concerts didn't exactly pass without incident. Gardiner described Bocelli as, quote, probably the biggest signing I've ever made, but fans who attended the gigs faced huge queues and a dire lack of parking. Some of them complained that they couldn't even see the performers from their seats. As per one of 3 articles about Gardiner by journalist Stuart Finley in the Press and Journal, fans described the concerts as, quote, an embarrassment to Inverness and disorganised chaos, and 2 months later, several firms claimed that they were still owed thousands by the concert company. Gardiner claimed in that same article, quote, the people engaged by the concert company were indeed a shambles, fraudulent even, end quote. That is just one of several incidents which didn't endear Cally Thistle's management to local businesses and the council during Gardiner's tenure. The Inverness Cally Thistle Concert Company was dissolved in June 2024. Next up was a battery storage scheme or battery farm earmarked for land close to Fairways Business Park in Inverness. The proposals would raise £3.4 million, Cally Thistle estimated, but though they were initially approved by a narrow 3-2 margin by the council's planning committee, following such a low turnout, Nairn councillor Paul Oldham lodged a notice of amendment to have the decision reconsidered by the full council. This led to a war of words between Cally Thistle and Oldham. Chairman Ross Morrison claimed there were councillors, quote, hell-bent on killing the club by abusing their power, end quote. Meanwhile, Gardiner accused Oldham of, quote, appallingly biased behaviour, end quote. Oldham claimed that as a result of those comments, he had to take greater security measures through fear of his and his wife's safety. Morrison and Gardiner's attacks on Oldham possibly didn't do their application any favours with the rest of the council planning committee, who rejected the proposals when they convened in full. It is still possible that the battery farm could go ahead, however remote, but only if the central Scottish government decides to overturn the local council's votes. Oh, and of course, there was the Park and Ride scheme with the Norwegian state-owned hydropower company Statkraft. Cally Thistle had offered to run a park and ride service from the Caledonian Stadium's car park during Statkraft's construction of a hydro scheme, in a move which the club hoped would raise between £1.4 to £1.7 million. When that fell through, just 3 days before Cally Thistle discovered that the Inverness and Cromarty Firth Green Freeports wouldn't include the area around their stadium, Chairman Ross Morrison had seen enough and resigned. Again, to be fair to Gardiner, and arguably much fairer than he actually deserves, you could argue that Cally Thistle's inability to properly increase revenue streams while spending reasonably heavily on players and staff during their glory days forced whoever was put in charge of the club to try and be creative. And, to be doubly fair, there was nothing that Cally Thistle could do about the COVID-19 pandemic, which drastically reduced revenues, plunging clubs who were already in financial trouble into serious crises. For Inverness, that crisis was existential. To be less fair to Gardiner, according to that same series by Stuart Finley in the Press and Journal, and a whole host of anecdotal evidence online, he was immensely unpopular with an awful lot of people, who describe him as, quote, the most difficult and unhelpful individual that they had ever worked with, accused him of, quote, making up numbers, and of, quote, focusing on how to prosecute Caley Thistle's own fans and go after them, rather than analysing where things had gone wrong, following the club's relegation. There was also the strange incident in which several Scottish Championship clubs accused Caley Thistle, under Gardiner, of hatching a secret plan to null and void the season during COVID, which it is estimated would have cost cash-strapped Inverness themselves at least £175,000. Still, at least things were going well on the pitch. Oh no, that's right. They were going terribly as well. In June 2021, Inverness appointed former Scottish international Billy Dodds as their new head coach. Previously employed as John Robertson's assistant, Dodds had never worked as a head coach before. As far as many Caley Thistle fans are concerned, it was an appointment which put the club on a road to relegation. A sixth-place finish in the 2022-23 season, down from third, was a bitter disappointment, but reaching the final of the Scottish Cup most likely saved Dodds' job. It was a sensational achievement, given the headwinds that Inverness were facing at the time, which included victories against Livingston, Kilmarnock and Falkirk, and another day out at Hampden, where Inverness lost 3-1 against Celtic. But in the long run, by saving Dodds' job, it may well have done Caley Thistle more harm than good. Following a catastrophic start last season, in which Inverness lost 4 out of their first 5 games and drew the other one, Dodds was sacked, with Caley Thistle sat bottom of the Scottish Championship table. Dodds was replaced by Duncan Ferguson, another big name in Scottish football, having represented the Tartan Army and become a club legend at Everton during the 1990s and 2000s. Ferguson must have a fetish for crisis clubs, or, more likely, just a lack of managerial opportunities, because his only other first-team role came at Forest Green Rovers, where he won just 1 of his 18 games in charge, giving him a fairly disastrous 5.56 win percentage. What Caley Thistle desperately needed was someone who knew the league, had a bit of experience in management, especially in relegation scraps, and could get them firing on short notice. What they got was someone who had won 1 game in his only senior managerial role before, had never worked in Scottish football, and hadn't even played north of the border for 3 decades. Again, in fairness to Ferguson, or Big Dunk as he is affectionately known, he was handed a ragtag bunch of random loanees and a squad that had an axe taken to it as a result of emergency cost-cutting. Nonetheless, Caley Thistle still somehow managed to lose a reported £1.2 million last season, an eye-watering sum for a Scottish Championship club. Whatever intentions Ferguson had in the Highlands, it quickly became about crisis management, both on and off the pitch. He reacted in kind, attempting to stop the rot by sitting deep, and hoping not to concede goals. It worked, to a degree, in the sense that they only conceded 40 goals all season, the second best defensive record in the division, trailing only title winners Dundee United. The only issue is that they didn't score any either. Only Basement Boys Arbroath had a worse record in front of goal, as Caley Thistle ended the season 11th, went into the promotion-relegation playoffs, and lost 5-3 on aggregate against Hamilton Academical in the final. The pain of relegation, and the knowledge of what that would mean for the club's already troubled finances was severe, but over the summer, Caley Thistle fans discovered something even worse. The club, under Gardiner, had one last master plan to save their financial future, which was to relocate Caley Thistle's training facilities over 130 miles south to Kelty Hearts' new Central Park in Fife, a 2.5-hour drive from Inverness, with players only making that long journey north for home games. If you're thinking that sounds insane, that is because you're a normal person with a functioning brain. If you're thinking that sounds like a great idea, you're probably Scott Gardiner. Caley Thistle's senior management contended that the move could save the club somewhere in the region of £400,000, allowing them to remain full-time in League One, in addition to making it easier to attract players, given the abundance of talent in the lowlands, many of whom are reluctant to move as far north as Inverness. That's great and all, but you are called Inverness Caledonian Thistle. The clue is sort of in the name. The whole point of the 1994 expansion of the Scottish League was to include the representation of two new teams from the Highlands due to improved transport links, and the justification behind merging two historic football clubs, founded during the 1880s, was to create a stronger team capable of representing Inverness on a national stage. What use was any of that if the bastardised child of that troubled marriage isn't even based in Inverness? How long can you really call yourselves the pride of the Highlands when your training ground and offices are literally in the lowlands? As if all of that wasn't bad enough, Caley Thistle's own players, who would obviously be required to radically alter their home lives and living arrangements, reportedly didn't find out about the planned training ground relocation until the same time as everyone else, with zero consultation. What's more, though Caley Thistle had struck a deal with Kelty Hearts, who play at New Central Park, the stadium and neighbouring 4G pitch where Inverness would train is actually owned by Fife Council. In response to the news, a seemingly surprised Fife Council stated, quote, "On behalf of Fife Council, we'll need to be involved to review current booking terms and conditions, as well as weigh up the impact that this may have on the availability of the community pitch to other users with any potential benefits," end quote, suggesting that, despite owning the stadium pitches and land, they hadn't even been involved in negotiations, adding, quote, "Kelty Hearts lease part of the ground their buildings are on, porter cabins and such like, on land we own surrounding the artificial pitch. Any arrangement for use of that space should come through the council. It is a community use facility," end quote. The whole thing was a total train crash, and a train from Inverness to Kelty, in case you were wondering, takes about 4 hours. Caley Thistle supporters, unsurprisingly, launched an immediate protest, threatening to boycott the club, lobbying for Gardiner's belated dismissal, and voting unanimously against relocating the club's training and offices to Fife. It was made clear that if the move was voted down, Inverness would likely go into administration, be deducted 15 points this season, and therefore almost certainly relegated, a further 5 points next season, be forced to go part-time again, and be liquidated if external funding couldn't be sourced. In that knowledge, Caley Thistle fans still voted resoundingly against the motion, and who could really blame them? Well, Duncan Ferguson, I suppose, among others, who was dismissed when Inverness went into administration and bemoaned the vetoing of the move, but I was actually asking that as a rhetorical device. So that is where we are now, with Caley Thistle dead last in League One, on -3 points 11 games into the season, managed by Scott Kelleher, and in administration. In August, local businessman Alan Savage, who was the club's chairman from 2006 to 2008, stepped in to save the club, relieving Scott Gardiner of his duties. Prior to that, Gardiner, who had resigned as chief executive without leaving the club, looking to source external investments, had championed a takeover attempt by Keaton Makwana's 77 Ventures. Makwana, who used to produce a podcast called The Business Distillery, posts religiously on LinkedIn, and has founded and dissolved a whole host of companies. Never has someone screamed more of drinking Huel than this man, claimed to have tried to buy several football clubs in recent years, but to no avail. That might have been because he couldn't afford one, as his £2.5 million takeover attempt for just over 50% of the club, and promised to invest an initial £800,000 to £900,000, reportedly fell at the first hurdle, when Makwana failed to provide a satisfactory proof of funds. Savage called off Makwana's takeover attempt amid accusations that the man was a fantasist, much to Gardiner's disgust in a recent column in the Daily Mail. Savage cleared several of Caley Thistle's outstanding debts, including a significant one owed to their kit manufacturers Puma, as well as offering to cover the club's administration costs, which are likely to cost around £350,000. There were talks held with a couple of interested parties, including Denmark's richest person, Anders Holk Bovolsen, worth an estimated $12.6 billion, who is already the largest landowner in Scotland, with more than 220,000 acres, as well as having acquired Danish club FC Midtjylland from Brentford owner Matthew Benham in 2023. A deal wasn't able to be reached before Inverness entered into administration, though. Caley Thistle aren't the first Scottish club to enter administration, nor are they the only one facing significant economic hardship right now. For a country that is statistically speaking more obsessed with football, per capita, than anywhere else in the world, the governance of Scottish football is abysmal. There are those who argue that Scotland, a nation of 5 million, cannot sustain roughly half as many professional football clubs as England, a nation of over 55 million, and that a reality check is required. And I don't know, maybe they are right in some instances. But that shouldn't apply to the only Scottish league and full-time football club in Inverness, a city of over 80,000 people and rising, and one of only 8 cities in Scotland as a whole. The scale of missed opportunity over the last 10 to 15 years is staggering, and if Caley Thistle had focused on low-hanging fruit, like improving the matchday experience for supporters, rather than the Hail Mary of multi-million-pound business ideas, they could have put the club on a stable footing. That potential remains. A new owner could theoretically improve the stadium, although an outright relocation would be preferable, with the Caledonian Stadium on the arse end of an industrial estate, put some effort into marketing, merchandise and engaging supporters, and create a half-decent bar or clubhouse where fans could spend time before and after matches, instead of spending their money elsewhere. None of this is rocket science. Plenty of even smaller clubs in Scotland and Inverness seem to manage it fine. Caley Thistle created a crowdfunding campaign in a last-gasp attempt to avoid entering administration, but only managed to raise £80,000 of the £200,000 required before October 16th. Even if they had reached their goal, they would have required an additional £1.2 million to make it through until the end of this season. It has been reported that 3 interested parties have approached the club since they entered administration, and in such a fast-moving situation, the likelihood of something stupid, important, or stupid and important having happened by the time that this video comes out, or within days of its release, is considerable. This video is very long, my apologies about that, unless you prefer longer videos, in which case, I suppose you're welcome. But it is terse when compared to the notes that I made researching it. There was no space for details about the overpaying for loanees, attendance chat, the £3.42 million owed to directors, Keita Makwana claiming to have worked as a special advisor to David Cameron while he was Prime Minister, Cameron's team denying that claim when asked about it, and Makwana quietly removing it from his LinkedIn page, the disgraceful treatment of former players, most notably club legend Aaron Doran, who ended up having to crowdfund his own surgery after Caley Thistle allegedly twice cancelled it, allowing his contract to run down, Gardner's alleged 28,000 unread emails, although on that point and that point only, I can sympathise. Apologies to anyone who has ever DM'd or emailed me if I've not responded. And a whole spiel about one of the most influential men in the history of football tactics, Peter McWilliam, who was from Inverness and began his career at Inverness Thistle. But hey, you can't have it all. I will just leave you with this. In Philippians 4:8, Paul says, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honourable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things." Beautiful words. And I say, whichever club next employs Scott Gardner, God help them. And I'm not even sure that he could help. That is it for today's video, but thank you all very much, as ever, for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it, I obviously hope that was the case. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and of course, make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on, not just for this channel, HITC7s, but also my second channel, Alfie Potsama, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos that you might fancy watching after this one. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, or Threads via the username @HITC7s on all 3, should you wish to do so. And all of those links, plus a whole lot more good stuff, should be down in the video description below. Cheers.